Hey everybody, it's hwsteele. Today is March 31st, 2021, and this is the fifth and final weekly video for the month of March this year. Being the last weekly video of the month, it also means that it's the Gann Week video. So, continuing the Gann Week series, in this video I'm going to talk to you briefly about the master time factor, W.D. Gann's master time factor. Now I'm going to tell you straight up here in the beginning, I am not going to tell you what the master time factor is, but I will show you several places in some of Gann's works, specific places where you can see either the master time factor somewhere in there or the effects of the master time factor. So let's go ahead and start with that. The first place we're going to look is W.D. Gann's 1954 promotional. In this 16-page book, actually, or pamphlet really, on page 5, Gann actually talks openly, very briefly, about the master time factor. So if we look at that, the third paragraph here, let's read this really quickly. It says, on March 1st, 1933, by the use of his master time factor, Mr. Gann forecast bottom for stocks and commodities and advised buying for a big advance, as shown by the market letters issued March 1st and 3rd given below. This is another proof of the great value of Mr. Gann's discovery of a master time factor. So it's openly being talked about just very briefly right here. Now what's really interesting is a couple pages later, this is page 5 of this promotional. On page 7, the very first paragraph here, we read this. It sounds very familiar. W.D. Gann has always made a success trading in very active, fast-moving markets and has made a great record for predicting the extreme high and extreme low on commodities and stocks. These accurate predictions are based on his discovery of the master time cycle, which repeats at certain intervals. So it sounds very similar to that paragraph we just read about the master time factor, except this time we read the master time cycle. Okay, so instead of factor, we're seeing cycle here, but it sounds, what the description of it sounds pretty darn close. Now what's very interesting is in the stock market course, one of the versions of the stock market course, we have chapter 5, and the title of this chapter is actually Master Time Factor and Forecasting by Mathematical Rules. Now what's really interesting about this is in the actual chapter right here, we don't ever see Gann write the words master time factor. We do, however, see master time period, which is great cycle. It's also the great cycle of 60 years is referred to as the master time period. So this would seem to be another evidence pointing toward the possibility that the master time cycle is the master time factor. But the truth of the matter is there's no evidence as to who actually printed this right here, the chapter cover page for this part of the stock market course, or of this particular version of the stock market course. So there's no proof whatsoever that Gann's intention to have master time factor connected to this actually was there. So I will tell you that you can find the master time factor in this particular chapter. It's definitely, if you read through this entire chapter, you've read through the master time factor. You found the master time factor, whether you realize it or understand it or not. And it's not this right here. Okay? So going back to the promotional really quickly, I'm going to tell you straight up, the master time cycle is not the same thing as the master time factor. So another place that we can find the master time factor by Gann is in his book 45 Years in Wall Street. It's in here in more than one place. Okay, so now you have 3 separate places where you can actually discover W.D. Gann's master time factor. The promotional talks about it openly, but you can actually derive it from this booklet. You can also derive it from this stock market course chapter, and you can derive it from 45 Years in Wall Street, this book, in multiple places. So those are 3 examples of places where you can find W.D. Gann's Master Time Factor. So if we bring up the most famous of Gann's works for people who really study Gann, we come up with Tunnel Through the Air. And we find the Robert Gordon's Great Campaign in Cotton in chapter 16. And also Robert Gordon's Great Campaign in Major Motors. Now, one of the most common misconceptions about what Gann's Master Time Factor is derived from this right here. It says, on Sunday, June 19th, 1927, Robert Gordon spent the day studying his charts and working out his cycles for stocks, cotton, and grain. He was short of Major Motors and was watching it very closely. On this day, he made a new and great discovery of a time factor from which he figured that Major Motors would decline, and then it goes on, talks about all that stuff. So the assumption is that Gann's talking about the Master Time Factor right here. And then another assumption that gets made is the fact that he's talking about June 19th. People see, June is the 6th month of the year. They see this as 619, which is very close to 618, which is phi, the golden ratio. So 1.618 or 0.618 is mistakenly believed to be the Master Time Factor because of this right here. It's not the Master Time Factor, okay? You can derive the Master Time Factor from information in this book, and you can prove it from different parts of this book. So in other words, the Master Time Factor can definitely be found in Tunnel Through the Air, and then different parts of Tunnel Through the Air can be used to prove out the fact that it's the Master Time Factor, just like you can do it in the promotional or the 5th chapter of the stock market course, that particular version of it anyway, and the 45 Years in Wall Street book. Okay, so these campaigns can help you prove out the Master Time Factor. But I'm here to tell you right now that the ratio of phi is not the Master Time Factor. So if somebody's telling you that, or that that's where you're leaning towards, that's not it. So don't waste your time on that. Another place in Tunnel Through the Air that's very popular is the Tokyo J1 story here on page 286 and 287. You can actually prove out the Master Time Factor. It's a little bit more difficult with this, but it can happen here in this story also. Okay, so now you have 5 different places specifically of Gann stuff where you can find the Master Time Factor and or prove it out. So if you think you found the Master Time Factor, try proving it out with one of those places. If you can't make it work with what you find in one of those 5 places, then you might not have the Master Time Factor figured out yet. Another place that you can find the Master Time Factor in multiple places is the Bible. It's in the Bible multiple times. Definitely in the Old Testament. So if you're going to concentrate on trying to find it in the Bible, look at the Old Testament. And once you figure out what the Master Time Factor is, if you're able to do that, then it's going to just be blatantly obvious what it is in the Bible. It's entirely possible that you can figure out the Master Time Factor from the Bible and then apply it to Gann stuff, but you can do it in either direction, from the Bible to Gann stuff or from Gann stuff to the Bible. And once you learn it, then it's kind of like, okay, I definitely see why Gann says he learned his stuff from the Bible. At least that part of it anyway is, once you understand it, it's very obvious. So I won't go past there. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave it here. Hopefully this has been helpful. At least it will point out a couple of places to you where you can look more specifically. and look for evidences of it and look for proofs of what you think it might be. And it gives you a couple of things to let you know that they are unquestionably not the master time factor. Phi is not the master time factor. The 60-year cycle is not the master time factor. Okay? So, until next week, this is hwsteele.